No more access for Russian fighter jets and reconnaissance aircraft. The steel net quietly woven by Ukraine in its own airspace is effectively turning into a no-fly zone. On June 7, 2025, the Ukrainian army reported that it had shot down a Russian Su-35 fighter jet as a result of an operation carried out by the Ukrainian Air Force in the direction of Kursk. An F-16 flying towards Kursk locked onto its target, knowing the coordinates of the Russian Su-35. Before the F-16 took off and headed towards Kursk, the Saab 340 AEW&C had already detected the Su-35's coordinates and transmitted this data to the Ukrainian pilot. The Ukrainian F-16 pilot then prepared the AIM-120 missiles. The only thing left to do was to fire them. Once within range, the Ukrainian pilot did not hesitate and fired the AIM-120 missiles at the Russian Su-35 jet. And then came the huge explosion. The Russian Su-35 jet crashed for the first time since the start of the war in such a tragic and humiliating manner. On January 14, 2024, a rare Russian aircraft was successfully shot down. The Russian A-50U, which maintained the air picture during the night duty cycle, was caught on a fixed route parallel to the border. As a result of the Ukrainian attack, the high-value airborne early warning aircraft crashed over the Azov Sea. The loss was confirmed by both sides. A second A-50U was lost on February 23, 2024. Throughout February 2024, Ukraine announced that it had shot down 13 Russian warplanes. Su-34 and Su-35 losses stood out in this wave. On April 19, 2024, a long-range Tu-22 M3 bomber was shot down. On May 26, 2024, 4 Su-34s were reported to have been downed on their return. On May 3, 2025, Ukraine announced that it had shot down a Russian Su-30 fighter jet with an R-73 missile fired from an unmanned aerial vehicle launched from the sea. This was the first fighter jet in the world to be shot down by an unmanned aerial vehicle launched from the sea. As mentioned earlier, on June 7, 2025, a Su-35 was shot down by an F-16. There will inevitably be losses in wars, but Russia's last attempt was on June 7. In other words, from that date onwards, the Russian Air Force had given up. The real issue here was how Ukraine closed the transition to all Russian air forces. This was made possible by Ukraine's effective implementation of early detection plus layered defense plus network-centric command. The network nervous system was provided by Link 16 plus Starlink plus SAR satellites. Air data flows from ground radars to IRIST/NASAMS/Patriot batteries and F-16 cockpits via Link 16. With SATCOM approval, this picture remains uninterrupted. Add to that the commercial military SAR satellite's ability to track stationary, semi-stationary targets, even under clouds, and the Russian reconnaissance/attack cycle came under constant pressure. The elements protecting Ukraine's airspace are not just radars or missiles. It is not only radars or missiles that protect Ukraine's airspace. Behind the scenes, there is European funding, American ammunition, and Scandinavian eyes. Our first point of contact is air superiority. Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support. Now let's get back to our main topic. Sweden's ASC-890 Air Early Warning Platform, which has been in development for a long time, is now in service. The delivery plan for Ukraine and the official approval process for this project have been transparently conducted since spring 2025. By the end of summer, the joint production letter of intent signed between Sweden and Ukraine transformed this cooperation from a temporary support framework into a permanent and sustainable defense partnership. The AirEye radar, the most critical component of the ASC-890, features a high-resolution, wide-beam scanning system developed for the early detection of low-altitude targets. Most traditional radars either detect threats at this level too late or miss them entirely. AirEye fills this gap, providing significant added value to Ukraine's airspace. It has not yet been announced how many platforms will reach full operational capacity and on what schedule. However, the system's power is not limited to its own radar range. The real strategic importance lies in the integrated link that the ASC-890 establishes with other Western elements in a network-centric warfare environment. This is because the earlier and longer a target is tracked, the wider the engagement window for ground batteries becomes. The easier it is to plan an interception route for fighter aircraft. This gives F-16s the ability to detect distant targets early, engage in a short window. The downing of the Su-35, announced on June 7, 2025, demonstrated that Ukraine's tactical air-to-air engagement threshold had been raised. Although official confirmations directly attributed to a single platform remain limited, the doctrine of short-term closure on high-value targets with F-16 plus AWACS synchronization is now being put into practice. The second pillar of the network is the financing and supply rhythm. A striking model has emerged here. At the heart of the new financial order taking shape under the NATO umbrella is the PURL model, Europe's common budget pool. This mechanism aims to establish sustainable defense support for Ukraine by pooling resources from capitals across the continent. Unlike traditional donation systems, PURL provides both scalability and flexibility for decision-making states to prioritize their own national interests. In recent weeks, two major European economies, Germany and France, have announced significant contributions to this pool, demonstrating that the system is now operational. Simultaneously, there is significant activity on the other side of the Atlantic. The US State Department has published new potential sales approvals for Ukraine in two strategic areas. The first is the official approval of Starlink services, a key communications infrastructure throughout the war. And the second is a new supply package covering high-impact weapon systems, such as long-range munitions dropped from the air. It is no coincidence that these developments were announced within the same timeframe. On the contrary, it shows that a clear division of labor has emerged in the structure of support for Ukraine. Europe is holding the purse strings, America is keeping the lines open. This structure is not just a temporary sharing of the burden, but a sign of a deeper strategic architecture. This division of labor between the parties creates a system that is relatively more resilient to internal political turmoil. By taking on the bulk of the financing, European countries are both gaining political credibility and being able to adjust the pace of aid to suit their own public opinion. On the other hand, the US retains the advantage of controlling the technological dimension of deterrence by holding the final decision-making authority. The most frequently asked question today is whether this division of labor is permanent. Current indicators suggest that it is, at least in the medium term. This is because this structure redistributes tasks and responsibilities at both the political and military levels, establishing a more balanced model for burden sharing within the alliance. The northern flank also has a significant share in this model. Norway and Germany have announced a new joint budget plan for the supply of Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. This package, worth approximately $650 million, includes not only launchers but also radars, command elements, and possibly PAC-3 class interceptors. Although this figure attracts attention in the public eye due to its high cost, it actually has a much more concrete meaning for Ukrainian cities. The last line of defense against ballistic and cruise missiles is being strengthened. Patriot systems, especially in the PAC-3 MSE variant, offer the ability to intercept threats approaching at high altitude and high speed using the hit-to-kill method. Direct collision. This means direct kinetic destruction rather than deflection, especially for ballistic missiles. Against cruise missiles, it can operate with high success rates when the appropriate altitude and approach angle are achieved. In other words, an additional layer of security is being established over critical infrastructure and densely populated cities. However, it is not possible in practice to give ratios such as, "this city has become this much safer." Because every missile is different, every attack angle and tactical profile is unique. But one thing is certain. Each new battery creates the opportunity to protect multiple fronts simultaneously. Especially in large-scale missile attacks, additional batteries provide sectoral flexibility to the defense command. This also means that the picture in the air becomes more meaningful, because seeing is not enough. You also need to be able to strike. Let's take a closer look at the air-launched long-range munitions, which are the striking arm of the network. The approval process is conducted under the term potential sale. The final delivery, quantity, and configuration may vary. But the message is clear. Ukraine's capability set to strike deep targets with low visibility and long range is expanding. This capability is valuable not only for striking rear facilities, but also for keeping the Russian radar communications network under constant pressure. Simply put, air defense is not only tested at the moment of impact, it can also be eroded during the standby period. Now, let's put these pieces together. The aerial picture comes from above. On the ground, Patriot and other layers await the fire. In the distance, long-range munitions launched from the air stand ready to apply pressure to the rear lines. To summarize this trio in one sentence, a system is being established that makes flight expensive without banning it. An official no-fly decision would ignite political debate in many NATO capitals. But what we see here is a military technical substitute mechanism. No one is raising a flag, but a barrier is being erected. One side of this barrier involves early warning and surveillance. The other side most likely involves prevention and punishment. At this point, a detail that appears to be Starlink approval, but is actually the nervous tissue of the system, comes to the fore. One of the most critical experiences on the ground since the beginning of the war is that the continuity of the connection is as decisive as the strike itself. You may have long-range ammunition, but if you cannot track the target live, if you cannot keep the data on the network, the command-control cycle is disrupted. The official and regular provision of satellite communication services affects not only the reconnaissance attack chain, but also the more reliable transmission of radar data in the central command units of air defense. In short, connectivity creates the multiplier effect for ammunition. When this is approved, the synergy of all players on the network increases. During the February 2024 series of shootdowns, maintaining tactical awareness was crucial. The loss of A-50 disrupted Russian air-ground coordination, while Ukraine established multiple sensors on a single-screen superiority with Link 16/SATCOM. As a result, Russian jets were unable to open a wide time window over the city. How this increased synergy could lure Russia into a trap is another point of interest. What is meant here is not a simple ambush or a metaphorical trap, but a cost trap, created directly in the decision cycle. So even if the flight or attack takes place, the balance between the output obtained and the risk and cost paid continuously shifts against Russia. This can be seen with concrete examples. When the A-50 early warning aircraft is more likely to be detected while on duty, it has to shorten its mission time. The flight still takes place, but the scope and continuity of the data collected are reduced. This is a trap in itself. Orlan-class UAVs return from missions sooner due to electronic warfare and link interruptions, and the density of data transmitted from the field decreases. This is another form of trap. The flight takes place, but the information chain weakens. The picture is similar for cruise missiles. If more complex routes must be charted and more ammunition used to hit the same target, this is also an economic trap. The cost of the attack increases exponentially. With the F-16 entering service, the AWACS vector plus Link 16 sharing plus flight window optimization came together. The downing of the Russian Su-35 on June 7, 2025, was seen as the concrete outcome of this chain. The Su-34 losses reported in separate weeks showed that low-altitude escape profiles were no longer safe either. The picture presented so far shows that Russia's air and reconnaissance cycle is becoming increasingly expensive and risky. This development does not lead to a short-term outcome such as all flights will stop. However, the nature and scope of missions change. Flight times are shortened, altitude preferences are reshaped, and certain areas become passable only at high risk. The narrowing of flyable air corridors over Ukraine becomes central to strategic effectiveness. The effects of this transformation on the front are multi-layered. Increased air defense coverage means more clear nights for civilian life and critical infrastructure behind the front lines. This makes it possible for shelter alarms to sound less frequently, for power lines to operate longer, and for transportation and supply lines to remain uninterrupted. This increases both psychological and logistical resilience. The likelihood of surprise attacks succeeding decreases. Russia's sudden attacks using low-altitude cruise missiles or swarms of UAVs can be stopped before reaching their targets, in an environment where early warning radars are operational. Therefore, attack plans must be revised at both the tactical and munitions levels. Each new wave of attacks becomes more costly. More missiles or unmanned systems must be used to achieve the same destructive effect. This situation increases the daily operational costs of the aggressor and increases the economic burden of the war. When the continuity of aerial reconnaissance is disrupted, the accuracy of artillery and rocket units is directly affected. When the real-time data flow is disrupted, the targeting cycle lengthens. Counter-battery detection and destruction times increase. This gives Ukraine's artillery units a time and space advantage. The rhythm of the offense-defense balance is disrupted, and a threshold is crossed in favor of defense. An air force increasingly constrained by weaker data, higher costs and shorter mission durations loses its ability to dictate the tempo of the war. The defending side, however, can establish a more flexible and resilient rhythm thanks to agile air defense networks and satellite-supported command chains. PAC-3MSE upper ceiling, IRIS-T-SLM/SLS mid-layer, NASAMS point area defense, F-16, CAPAS-C890/AW-ACS early warning, Link 16/SATCOM nerve center, SAR satellites constant surveillance. One covers the other's blind spots. That's why Russian jets are reluctant to head for the city without complementary support. When all these indicators are considered together, it becomes clear that the Russian Air Force's impact on Ukraine is not only limited, it is gradually dissolving. Signal intelligence from E-3A AWACS platforms operating on NATO's eastern flank and observations on the ground reveal that this trend carries the risk of becoming permanent rather than temporary. However, it should be noted that there are also some counter-arguments. The Russian side will continue to strain the network with electronic warfare, decoys, and anti-radiation missiles. Some nights, these methods may even yield results. However, as the network grows and its financing model transcends political fluctuations, the impact of such moves diminishes. This is because the established structure is not dependent on a single node. Even if one center is hit, other sensors and batteries keep the chain intact. As the eyes in the sky diversify and the shield on the ground becomes layered, creating a large gap with a single shot becomes nearly impossible. This situation exponentially increases the attacker's cost. This is precisely where Ukraine's F-16 fleet comes into play, because as the reliability of the aerial picture increases, engagement decisions are made more accurately, and moments of selective superiority are captured more frequently in both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. The emphasis on selective here is important. We are not talking about continuous superiority across the entire front. We are talking about superiority created at the right time, in the right sector, with the right combination. Network logic produces precisely these opportunities. So, can this logic enable Russia to achieve its full invasion objective? The question must be assessed independently of political will, on a purely technical and logistical basis. If Russian air reconnaissance capabilities and firepower superiority are constantly suppressed, the attrition strategy applied on the front line will directly affect the supply chain. This means more delays, higher losses, and a more fragile supply tempo. In addition, if ammunition depots, fuel centers, and command nodes in the rear are regularly hit by long-range weapons, it becomes increasingly difficult to raise the intensity of the attack to the planned level. This scenario does not mean that the Russian army will be completely pushed back. However, it is certain that its capacity to persist in its objectives will be eroded. Natural obstacles conducive to defense amplify the effect of this erosion. Therefore, the expected outcome in the medium term is not sudden territorial changes or rapid advances. Rather, it will be constant brakes on the operational tempo of the Russian army and mandatory restrictions on its mission profiles. This scenario highlights another reality for Kyiv: strategic patience. As time goes on, Russia's offensive momentum will decline, while Ukraine, with international support, will make its defense line more resilient. It is precisely at this point that a division of labor model that transcends politics comes to the fore. As European countries make regular contributions to the PURL pool, and especially as Nordic defense initiatives add new layers, America's approval and licensing mechanisms become not just a technical process, but also a powerful signaling effect. The message is clear. The supply chain is tied to the calendar and cannot be disrupted by one-off moves. This assurance is critical not only for the sustainability of a battery used in the field, but also for headquarters engaged in planning. Because when the horizon extends, training investments are made with confidence, maintenance and repair quality improves, and the system's lifespan is managed in a planned manner. Therefore, although the phrase, "Europe provides financing, the US keeps the line open," may sound like just a slogan, it actually describes a mechanism that operates on the ground every day. Thanks to this mechanism, an unbreakable link is established between the preparations behind the front lines and the resistance at the front. Looking at it today, the reasonable scenario for the next 90 days in the skies over Ukraine is as follows. More intensive and earlier warning-based precautions, shorter and more limited Russian flight profiles, periodic pressure strikes in depth, and a measurable increase in confidence in city defenses. This does not mean the war is over, but it slows down the pace of the game in favor of defense. Every day that defense buys time, the cost to the other side increases. This redefines the terms at the political table. The value of this network will be seen not only today, but also in the energy target pressures expected to rise again during the winter period. Because when it comes to low-altitude threats and intense UAV waves, the early warning plus layered shield plus SATCOM-based command triad becomes the equation that determines the fate of cities. Let's put it plainly as we conclude. A network is being established that makes flying expensive without declaring a no-fly zone. Sweden's Eye, the Nordic Shield, the European Vault, the American Line, and Ukraine's platforms are links in the same chain. This chain narrows Moscow's air and reconnaissance window, transforming its full-scale occupation strategy into a target constantly hitting obstacles on the military technical ground. What will happen next? If this network maintains its rhythm and expands, moments of selective superiority on the front lines will increase. This will determine who retains the initiative on the ground. We will follow more together. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to show your support. Thank you for watching.